Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Leanpub launch video for 3 essays on NetBSD. I was wondering if you could take a moment to talk to all of us a little bit about yourself, about who you are and what you do, and what your book is about and who it's for.
So I'm Chris Pinnock. I currently work in crypto. I work for the Tezos Foundation, and we administer grants and investments for the Tezos blockchain to support that chain and make it good and great. I have a history in mathematics. I did a PhD long time ago, and around about that time, I started playing with operating systems. A lot of people were getting into Linux at the time, but I decided to look at FreeBSD and NetBSD. And this little book is a collection of things that I was doing all the way back in 1999. So that's the sort of starter for 10, I suppose.
Yeah, and is it and interested, people interested in the history of computing and stuff like that, or people who are interested in learning about operating systems, and this would be an example of how they could get into doing that?
So there's three essays in the book. So the first essay is about changing the binary format. So around about I think about 1998, um, Linux had switched to the executable and linkable format ELF, and NetBSD was still using the a.out format, which is basically a binary format with a few headers cobbled onto it. And it was getting a bit creaky because things like C++ need to have sections in the binary for running bits of code before you run the binary and bits of code at the end, things like destructors, constructors. And although you could kind of get away with it, it would be better to have a more modern format. So Christos Soulas and I think Paul Cronenberg, they were working on this, and I was following it. And I did the migration by hand using just the source code. I was just following it at the time and took an interest. And I wrote a load of notes. This was 1999. And of course, time passes, and then I find myself in 2022 writing these notes up, and it sort of led me to go and really examine what these things were. So that essay tells you what about the a.out binary format and some of the history around it, and it also tells you about the ELF format, some of the history around that, and it runs through the conversion process. So we fire up a VM of NetBSD 143. I've got a download for that. And then we go for the actual conversion process, make a compiler, target ELF, and convert the system. So you can actually follow along using systems that are like, over 26 years old.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
that's Yeah, sorry, go
yeah.
ahead. That's just a really
Uh,
fascinating. Like, just great to sort of. It's one of the great things about computing is basically you can sort of like learn from these old things, just like they're like right in front of you, kind of as though they were just invented.
exactly, and there is a going back and looking at those things, you do get an understanding of them. You're looking under the hood and understanding what the reasoning for that change was. So that was the first essay. Then the second essay took that to a bit more of an extreme. So I took NetBSD 08 was the first release of the operating system, but you can't find that anymore. And if you ask any of the developers, they will not admit they've got a copy of it because there was a bit of a court case about
Mm.
who owned the sources. And so NetBSD 10 you can still get, and it's a very, very interesting system. I installed it on a VM, and I just naively gave it 8 gig of hard disk. And then when it overwrote the 2 gig boundary, it started to sort of do very interesting things with integers and crash. So you've got to be very mindful at the time. I think probably the largest disk you could get was something like 2 gig. The largest file size wasn't that big either. So really historical. And then the paper basically takes the NetBSD 1 system and upgrades it all the way through to I think NetBSD 9.3. There is a 10. I haven't done that yet, but from about NetBSD 2, it becomes very simple because they got the toolchain right. But the idea of it was to give some awareness of how you build the toolchain, how you target, how you upgrade, how you do all this with source code. So I ended up with a virtual machine with every kernel from NetBSD 1 all the way through to NetBSD
Oh,
9.3. Yeah.
oh.
And the
Yeah,
interesting thing is the shell, the shell from the original NetBSD 1 will still run on the latest. So it's fully binary compatible, which is really nice to see.
yeah,
So that was
that's
an,
yeah, that's just fantastic, and it's just so great to see, these sort of old. And one of the great things about talking about books like this is these old projects from a long time ago, notes and stuff like that, can come to life, in a brand new book in
yeah,
2026 there for people to enjoy going forward. And you've been busy. You've published a couple of other books recently. They're both you've this one's going to be out in print relatively soon,
yes,
I think.
yes,
But you've got two others out in print that you also wanted to talk about, I think, and you can actually
yeah.
show them to
I
us as
can.
well.
So last year I did, you remember we did the video on
Yeah,
this one
yeah.
and I got it printed and I just, because I've got a bit of OCD, I've got this itch to have this on my shelf along with
Ah, yeah.
my PhD thesis. So I've got, I've just done these so this is a testament to Leanpub really. So I started work on these in the 1st of June. So this one's my PhD thesis and this one is my master's thesis and some notes I wrote in 1999. And these were in LaTeX.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and so I basically had a look at Leanpub. I thought I can print them using Leanpub, but can it do mathematics? A bit out of. So I had a look at Markua 031, and yes, you can do mathematics. And it's quite easy to convert LaTeX into that. So I started by writing a script because I'm old. I don't
Right.
AI, what's AI,
Yeah.
I wrote a Perl script and pretty much it did most of it, apart from some of the big sums. And I asked Claude, how do I do this in Markua? And it went off and read the version of Pandoc you use, as it does, and it came back and told me exactly what to do. And then I kept feeding it in, and it was reading it and checking it against the original PDF for skew mistakes and so on. And eventually, I got a PDF, and it was checking for leakage
Right.
into the margins, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And it found one mathematical error in my
Oh,
master's thesis as well.
that's funny. All this time later.
It wasn't a big deal, fortunately. It was just a typo. But um, what dropped out of that is the print ready PDFs, and they just dropped straight into Amazon. And then Claude make me a cover that looks like there's an old book on characters. Probably shouldn't mention it, but the cover's very similar. And make me a cover that looks like that. Claude did that, and within 2 weeks I had these. And the third one, which is the one we're talking about, a similar thing. I had these three essays, and I thought, well, it'd be nice to have a copy on my shelf. If someone wants to buy them, they're free on Leanpub in ePub format. People can download them. But I've got them on my shelf, and that was a relatively painless process from beginning to end.
Well, that's just fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that and for the kind words about our print ready PDF output kind of feature, which we've been working on and iterating on for a long time. Getting things you know perfect for print is kind of not easy. But it's just so great to see that people can make we were talking a little bit before, but make work from a long time ago kind of come to life
Hmm.
and be alive again. And this is the first time though I've heard of someone using AI to discover a kind of, I don't know, let's say 30-year-old math like typo in a
Yeah,
in a master's thesis, but that's just fantastic. Well, the book we were talking about today was 3 essays on NetBSD, but you can also find 2 essays on group theory, learning Russian verbs, and learning Russian handwriting for sale on Leanpub on Chris's profile page. So thank you very much, Chris, for taking the time to do this video with me today.
thanks for having me. All the best.